All right, welcome everybody. I see we have some people coming in. We're gonna wait a few minutes to make sure that everyone is in on time. So thank you if you're just coming in. Hi, welcome if you're just coming in. We're gonna give about a minute or two to allow some others to come in. Good afternoon, everybody. Give about another minute for some folks to come on in. We'll get started. Good afternoon, everybody. We'll wait just a little bit longer before we start. All right, so looks like we're about close to starting now. I see people still coming in. Give a few more seconds and then we'll get started. Good afternoon if you're just coming in. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. It looks like the trickling in is slowing down now. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Justine. I'm a museum educator at the San Diego History Center, and I want to thank you all for joining us today for the latest presentation in our SD 101, the History of Our Region webinar series. The History Center also wants to extend a very special thank you to our members for all of your support. We couldn't do this without your help. And before we begin, I do want to go over a few things. So our speaker, Barry, will answer questions as best as he can at the end of our presentation. So there is a Q&A function typically at the bottom of the Zoom box. So you can use the Q&A function to ask those questions. And like I said, at the end, we'll go ahead and go through those questions for as long as we can. And like all of our presentations, this presentation will be uploaded onto our YouTube channel. It's currently on Facebook Live right now. And if you have not seen the previous presentations, those are also uploaded on our YouTube channel, which we'll go ahead and put in the chat box. If it hasn't already been placed in, we'll put it in momentarily. So I want to go ahead and get started. Our presenter today is one of the History Center's community historians. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to him. So this is Barry Goldlust, and he's going to be talking about our favorite park today. So go ahead, Barry.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate all of you joining us again in this series of talks on San Diego, and of course brought to you by the San Diego History Center and its two museums, the one in Balboa Park History Center and the Hunabaro Museum in Presidio Park. The title of our presentation today is Balboa Park, the Jewel of San Diego. It indeed is a jewel. Anybody who does not live here and is making a visit somebody is going to say to them, oh, you're going to San Diego, you've got to see the park, you've got to see Balboa Park and the zoo. And that is for a real good reason. There is so much to enjoy and see here at Balboa Park. And so today we're going to try and give you an idea of how it all came to be. This largest urban park in the United States and the second one to be founded, second to only a Central Park. And indeed, this park is larger than Central Park. And I will describe the terrain and you'll get an idea of what the park is like from a geographic standpoint, as well as a cultural standpoint. And so we're going to use a format of 4 questions. So we're going to start off with what shaped the park early, and talk about changes over time, what remains of the past, and what about the future. So needless to say, Alonzo Horton does appear probably every time we talk about San Diego. And he's just such an important individual. And he and a businessman, Ephraim Morse, are credited with being the individuals who have been responsible for proposing that land be set aside for this urban park. Initially, it was discussed that the amount of land would be something like 300 or so acres of land. Eventually, they settled on proposing over 1,400 acres of land. As you can see, and we've talked before, this park, known then as City Park and now Balboa Park, was situated right next to Horton's Addition. And this location afforded access to much of the population going forward. And so this land was presented to the trustees, who approved this in 1868. This petition from Alonzo Horton and Morse, this plaque appears just as you cross the Cabrillo Bridge on the west side of the park. And it's on a wall right near the entrance on the roadway. And these 3 individuals were the trustees, Estio, Schiller, and Sloan. This is Jose Guadalupe Estudillo. This is Marcus Schiller. We don't have a picture of Joshua Sloan, but he did exist. And this is Ephraim Morse, who is the business person and one of the early founders of the new town, early residents and business owner. The layout of the park is really quite interesting, and most of us don't get a chance to really see and understand what we're talking about here. But there's actually 3 portions, or mesas, or flat tabletop mountains, if you will. One is called the West Mesa, and this is the area that involves Bankers Hill and West Park areas. Then you have the Cabrillo Canyon under the Cabrillo Bridge, and then you have the Central Mesa, which is where basically all the activity occurs. This is the Prado area, and we'll talk obviously a lot more about that. Then we have the Florida Canyon Then we have the East Mesa, which is mostly residential. Now, the part of the park we're most familiar with is the Central Mesa, but because of the East Mesa in this whole area, this makes up an area of well, initially 1,400 acres. Now the park has about just under 1,200 acres, and the Central Park is about eight or 900 acres. So this is really the whole park, and this area is often not visited by daily visitors, but there's many activities and trails that the park affords. So from the time 1868 until the arrival of Kate Sessions to do her horticultural magic, there were numerous incursions of people and groups trying to get land from the city somehow for various commercial and sometimes civic reasons, such as a woman's indigent women's home. So some of these did occur. Most of them were rebuffed, fortunately, by the city government. And ultimately, to this day, out of that original 1,400 acres, approximately 1,200 acres remain for park use. And so here you can see what Kate Sessions has had started to do. This happens to be in 1904. She really arrived on the scene 1892 when she made a deal with the city for 30 plus acres of land on the northwest corner of the park, which is around Upas and Park, yes. And so she promised in return for using the land to plant trees throughout the park and the city for a 10-year period. And so she liked to make use of Arbor Day to rally people to come out and help plant trees. So you can see a variety of activities going on. I thought this was interesting. You can see a bunch of horses up on the hill here. But this is what the land looked like before it was planted, land that looked very different than it does now, land that was used for thousands of years by our indigenous population to sustain their life. But as a park in more modern times, planting was what was desired, and Kate Sessions basically got the ball rolling in a big way. What kinds of uses did the park be involved in early on? Well, this was 1911, but it did give you an idea that there were outdoor activities such as field days for the Navy fleet, banquet areas. You can see lots of activity going on, a very large area, looked really inviting. You see some foliage by 1911. There's quite a bit of foliage, and some of the buildings. Now, remember 1903, we'll go back to this year, was during the time that construction was was ongoing for the expo. One of the other things early on, before 1910, some of that foliage that was planted, and some trails through the park, which is one of the hallmarks of modern Balboa Park. Lots of trails, walking trails and bike trails, and the terrain is starting to look different. How has the park's use changed over time? Well, let's go back and just kind of set the stage a little bit. The park used to be known as City Park. But when the expo was beginning, when the boosters were thinking about this here, and in the years of mostly 1905 to 1910, they said, no, City Park is just kind of a mundane name. We need something more appropriate. And so there's this urban myth about the city running a contest to name Balboa Park, and I believe Harriet Phillips was credited with naming it Balboa Park. Well, that's not true. The only true part about it is that the newspaper ran a kind of a contest, which was not official in any capacity. People sent in their suggestions. The committee for improving improving the park would look at these here, but eventually, after a lot of hawing, this was not an easy process. They came up with the name Balboa Park, named after Vasco Núñez de Balboa, the first European to see the Pacific Ocean. And since the part of the theme of the expo is really celebrating the Panama Canal, this is what seemed to be appropriate to them, crossing Central America and seeing the Pacific Ocean. And so they named the park Balboa Park, and then they moved on to building the expo. The development of the park, it was intimately associated with the two expositions in the park and the development of the city. One of the things that this expo was supposed to and did accomplish was to introduce San Diego to the world. And so this was a big undertaking. San Diego is in this southwest corner of the United States, not easy to get to. They had to do some attracting, but they didn't want they wanted to upgrade the city. So one of the things that they upgraded was the Stingaree area, which, if you may recall from previous lecture, ran through the central part of the city down to the bay. And this is where all the immigrants who came to work in the city during particularly the development of Newtown, they lived down there. So there was a lot of displacement, a lot of upheaval from a city and a living standpoint as they tried to present the best face of San Diego. So 138 women were arrested, 136 promised to leave the city. They did. They most likely came back and relocated elsewhere, and 2 agreed to reform. The other things that were going on in the city related to the expo. Here's the Santa Fe station downtown. the new Spanish revival style station being built, and the old Victorian tower coming down. And we'll talk just a bit about the architecture. So here is the groundbreaking ceremony for the expo. I use this little piece of paper on the ground to point to George Morrison. George Morrison's name will come up over and over again as a supporter of the park development, the supporter of city organizations. He grew as the city grew, and it's a synergistic environment. And here is an older gentleman who is spade in hand, digging a small hole, and this big crowd behind him celebrating the occasion. So here is George Morrison that you can actually see. George Morrison, 1902 was a big step, and now we're going back a touch. 1902, that's before the thoughts of having an expo came up. And he decided with the improvement committee, Balboa Park committee, to bring in a good landscape architect. So he sought out Samuel Parsons on others' recommendations, and actually paid $10,000 to have him get involved in planning Balboa Park, not the expo, but the park. And so this was 1902. And he, along with John Olmsted from the Olmsted family architects who did other expositions like the 1893 exposition in Chicago, believed in open spaces, minimal buildings, and that sort of thing. Now this was early on, and so while Olmsted was on the scene, the transition started occurring around 1905 to thoughts about the expo. And eventually the expo, the architects that were the most prominent were Bertram Goodhue and Carlton Winslow, who really introduced the Spanish revival based on their own interest and experiences visiting various countries. And so this morphing from this open space concept to what we eventually see in Central Balboa Park happened because of the development of the expo. And so the concepts that Parsons and Olmsted advocated really went by the board, and they eventually left the area and left the architecture to Goodhue and Winslow. So here we are. We have this Spanish style colonial architecture and these wonderful, pleasing signs, posters inviting the world to the Panama, California exposition. They couldn't use the word international because in 1915, San Francisco actually received the federal funding and became the official exposition for the Panama Pacific International Exposition. As an aside, there's only one building left from that exposition in San Francisco. As we'll see and do see every day, all the buildings that carried over from our exposition to the present. So here are these wonderful pictures welcoming people to paradise. Once again, there's always one slide that's not meant to read, but you get the full flavor of the size of this exposition. Went quite far north past where the zoo is located, which is probably in this area. Many activities here. This is the Prado area where a lot of the buildings were located. Not much development was done in the Southern Palisades area, where the Air and Space Museum is, for example. That comes later on in 1935 Expo. So you can see that this is electric railway. John Spreckles, an electric railway. He had consolidated all the other lines. And so he basically owned the major transportation system. And it was partly because of his influence that the Central Mesa became the center part of the expo, because that's where most of the people would be. That's where his line ran, and he was interested in finding and encouraging people to get to the north suburbs. And so that was a major influence, and one of the reasons actually that John Olmsted did actually leave his position, because he felt that the expo should be down further south. If you're wondering what the first building that was put up, this is it. It's still standing. The administration building right on the east end of the Cabrillo Bridge, right at the entrance, west entrance to the park, right next to the California Tower and Dome Quadrangle in this area, designed by Irving Gill. So this was remodeled on a couple of occasions at least, but back to pretty much what the original architecture was. Administration building. Also, here's some pictures of construction of the Cabrillo Bridge. This bridge was meant to be one of the few permanent structures that were planned for the exposition. Wooden lattices helped mold the bridge that was designed after a bridge in Toledo, Spain. You can see at the same time in the background, this is the area where the California Tower is being constructed as well. So this bridge eventually was about 900 feet long. Now, this picture points out two things, one right and one wrong. The right thing is that this is an example of the postcards that the city sent out to across the country, really, to advertise coming to San Diego for the expo. And so there's a Cabrillo Bridge, and there's this nice lagoon, and there's some famous paintings that actually have boats here. But this lagoon never materialized. There were some wells, natural wells in this area, but this is basically the area where the 163 goes through now. But this is a vision. Another structure that was meant to be permanent, the California Tower and Quadrangle, once again on a postcard. Here's the St. Francis Chapel, which is really not open to the public. Some private ceremonies are held here, but it's not used as a formal church. But this was kind of Goodhue's design of something that would attract your attention. Another permanent structure was the largest lathe-slat building in the world, the Botanical Building, with its pool in front, once again on a postcard. So they were hitting all the big spots here, trying to attract people to come here to the expo. Early on, there was a greenhouse inside the Botanic Building, which is no longer in existence. And an aerial view in 1915 of the expo. You can clearly see the tower and the Cabrillo Bridge, and the countryside doesn't look quite as barren as, if you recall, early on in our lecture series. I mean, right now, at this point, the population was probably 40,000 or so. The 1910 census was just under 40,000. By 1915, it was probably over that, but not by too much. You got residential areas here on the west side. Bankers Hill is up in this area. And, you know, it's starting to look like a city. It's starting to look like a park. This expo attracted in 2 years, because it was carried over to 1916. It attracted almost 4 million people, a town of 40,000 attracting 4 million people. That was pretty successful. Beautiful exposition, promises of land of opportunity and crowds every day. And as I mentioned, they did indeed get many, many people. And when they carried over the expo to 1916, they did call it the International Expo, because the San Francisco Exposition did not carry over into 1916. Well, we had some interesting things going on. It wasn't all commerce and education that educating people to our area, but here's a cow made out of butter. Is one of the displays here. With this strange facade of Egyptian style, a replica of an ostrich farm. Ostrich farms did occur. In fact, in University Heights, in the early 1900s, there were ostrich farms. And if you look at the banners that line some of the streets, you'll notice ostrich figures, and that's the reason why. So every park should have pigeons. Having come from New York, I'm quite familiar with pigeons. But in fact, Balboa Park did not have indigenous pigeons. These pigeons were trucked into the park. You know, you pay attention to a pigeon, they will stay around. So here's Aubrey Davidson, who's one of the boosters and head of the Chamber of Commerce at one point, with a pigeon on his head. And these are the electricettes, these electric carts that carried people around the fairgrounds. This is in what we call the Casa del Prado now. It was called the Varied Industries and Food Products Building. And you can see lots of samples. People were sampling foods that they never tasted before, like cantaloupe, just to show people what what it was like here, that you could grow all kinds of things. And here's one of these postcards, which really demonstrates something very unusual at an expo. And that's not only showing fruit, but showing fruit on trees, growing a real growing orchard. They actually had at least a couple of them. And this was a big hit. And it was meant, of course, to show people that you could grow just about anything here. And so you can see the rest of the exposition in the background. One of the other things that occurred due to the expo in 1916, they found that there were a lot of animals that were left over from the previous year that were in quarantine, and it was not possible to get rid of them. And there were even some animals that were running wild. And so this is actually a picture on Park Boulevard, north of, or maybe approximately where the zoo is now. And in the background are cages. And this is the beginning of the San Diego Zoo. It was referred to as the San Diego Zoological Society, founded by Dr. Harry Wegeforth and his brother Paul and several other people. They looked for investors and they advertised in the paper, and people came forward. This is the beginning of our fabulous San Diego Zoo. The Morton Bay fig tree, that huge tree behind the Natural History Museum. This is what it looked like in 1920. It's really grown quite a bit since then. And this is just one photo of millions out there that indicate one of the uses that not very well known by the public, and that during both World Wars, the park was used by the military as a training ground, hospital use. It was very important, and in fact, for World War I, it was in use 1917 to 1918. Some of the buildings housed nurses, others there were barracks for the sailors and soldiers. This is World War II, and this is the Plaza de Panama, the great square that we still have in existence. This is the old building, which does not exist anymore. Fine Arts building, which was replaced by the Museum of Art right now. And this is a building that doesn't exist anymore. And so for the duration of the war, 1941 to 46, the Navy had used the whole park. It was not open to the public. It was a base. And in fact, the the southern area of the park was known as Camp Kidd, named after Isaac Kidd. He was a rear admiral who was one of the first to die in the sinking of the Arizona in Pearl Harbor. Another use of that pool in front of the Botanic Building for rehab and for swimming lessons among the military. 1919, the first building of the Naval Hospital, one that's in the Florida Canyon on the east side of Park Avenue, this early on. And the zoological gardens, the zoo, starts growing probably early 1920s. This is probably a time when the zoo finally got a fence around it. and therefore they could now charge admission because you had to go through main entrance. The fence, the funding for the fence was provided by Ellen Browning Scripps, who was funded several other important projects in the zoo. Okay, so now we have a hiatus. We go from 1915 to 1935. We have some of the old buildings starting to deteriorate, but a new expo in 1935 is planned and is carried off. It actually goes over into 1936. And this particular expo was really more about escapism. It was right in the middle of the Depression. There were no jobs around. A lot of the exhibits had to do with WPA projects. Civil Conservation Corps had a huge camp right down in this area, the parking lot just south of where the Sprinkles Auditorium is. So the lower Southern Palisades area was the area that was developed from this during this particular expo, as well as a continuation of the use of the expo lands that were used in 1915. This was called the Midway because they had all kinds of funky activities going on. But the other word that was used for this was it was a form of escapism. It was meant to cheer up the population. And so this was really the International Exposition, 1935. It did not have competition. So California Pacific International Exposition. What are some of the things that came out of this exposition? Well, here's the original Old Globe Theater. It was built for the expo. It later burned down, but was rebuilt. We'll touch about that. And what other things? The Spanish Village came into being during this expo, and the international cottages down in the southern Palisades as well. Here's a picture of the Palace of Education, no longer in existence, but I'll give you an idea of what the terrain was like. This is the area where all the museums in the south of Ford Building. Ford Building was had a mini assembly line behind it, and you could participate in that. This is the building that was then renovated and is now the Museum of Air and Space. Talked about some of the funky things that went on, two politically incorrect items here. A village of small people, and I don't know exactly where that was located. Zorro Gardens, which was a nudist colony, although the people there really weren't completely nude. They had skin tight clothing on, but it was something that people can kind of get lost with or in. And this Zorro Gardens actually is right next to a building which you can't see here, but is where the History Center is now located, the Casa de Balboa. And the zoo keeps growing, 2,500 live animals. And it just keeps growing, and that's about the best way to describe it. So what remains of the past? Well, quite a lot. And here is a quote from George Morrison. I'll only read a little bit about these shaky old buildings and his desire to not lose them. And somehow, without knowing how to explain it, we're instinctively, subconsciously, incurably in love with them and will not give them up. And this was the kind of thinking that was going on. I mean, you had all these decaying buildings that were not meant to last very long. And people like George Morrison started were supporting the any movement to protect to demolish these buildings, which occurred on many occasions. And so one of the earliest activists in terms of preserving these buildings was Gertrude Gilbert, not very well known, not as well known as her successor B. Evenson, but she was on the scene during the First World War. She helped support the troops of Balboa Park by arranging concerts. She was a musician herself, and then she became interested as the period between 1915 and 1935 was moving along. There were some threats to get rid of buildings. And with the very important support of George Morrison, they were able to rebuff a lot of this activity. And here is B. Evenson. It was only the last 15 or 16 years of her life, starting in 1967, that she became involved in Balboa Park and preserving the buildings. This is the first building that was preserved, the Casa del Prado, the one right across from the Casa de Balboa, where the History Center is located. And she was involved in founding in 1967 the Committee of 100. I believe they were all females, but this committee was responsible for activities that would help preserve buildings and structures in the park. And so this map again of the 1915 Expo indicates original buildings, ones that are gone and rebuilt. You can see there's some original buildings, the ones we talked about before. Here's the Botanical Building, and some of the buildings that are no longer around. In a couple of instances indicated in blue, there were buildings that were put up that were different than the ones that they replaced. In this case, the Natural History Museum replaced the Southern California County's building. In this case, the rebuilt literally of the Old Globe Theater, and now with a complex of at least 3 theaters there, and the Museum of Art. And occasionally down in the south, there are some buildings that are still standing. And of course, the organ pavilion, John Spreckle's donation of the organ during the 1915 Expo. So there are quite a few buildings left over, quite a few that are lost, which generally happens, but the past is still here, and that great architecture of the buildings along the Prado. So in 1977, Balboa Park became designated as a National Historic Landmark. And so the National Park Service has designated it as a national landmark. American Park Association, one of the great places in America. Balboa Park is one of the 14 California cultural districts in the state. It's a place where when there aren't these little vermin floating around in the air, you can actually get out and enjoy things like December nights and other events that support organizations such as the San Diego Pride. It's the end of the parade is on the West Mesa Boulevard area, and the park just supports the festivals associated with Pride. So this is a real community park that serves a lot of people, a lot of visitors, but importantly, a lot of people who live here who enjoy the park for all the trails and activities that it provides. So what about the future? Oh yes, what about it? Over the years, been lots of propositions, lots of suggestions about open space and whether to build parking lots. These are real threats to the any park. The cost of maintenance, climate change, the use of solar panels, for example, to find inexpensive renewable energy. The park is doing some of that as well. But there are a lot of threats, and you have to think about this here. As of around 2000, there was an article that was written which stated this year that there were just under 1,200 acres of parkland, but just under 300 of those acres were considered open space. As I think they defined it, open space meant that there was no activity assigned to it. So, you can plunk yourself down and not to worry about a little locomotive running you over. So that's only about 20% of the land in the park. That seems to be not a lot when you start with something as large as 1,400 acres. So this is where the future is, how to handle these particular threats and do the right thing and keep the place friendly for visitors and people alike. So that's kind of a capsule history of how the park came to be what it is right now. Hope you have learned something from this year. Appreciate, as always, your attendance here. It's awfully nice to know that there's somebody out there listening. So thank you very much. I believe we will, there we go. We will have some Q&A at this point.
Great, thank you, Barry, for your presentation. Looks like there's a lot of things down here. Very, very popular. All right, so we do have a couple of questions in the Q&A right now to get started with. From Charles. He says the controversy over the Naval Hospital, the earlier threat of the freeway, the commercialization of Inspiration Point, etc. Not sure what the question is there. Maybe Charles, you can.
In addition to some of the foreseeable issues or the issues of the past of the park, in speaking of the future of the park and some of the controversial things that were happening in the park as well.
Oh, cool.
So I think it's in addition to what Barry was saying.
Yeah. I mean, just examples of things that are threats to what what's happening, right?
All right. The next question is from Michael. He says, great presentation. Do you have any info where the ashes of Mary Colston were buried in City Park in 1904?
I recently found out that she was actually buried in the park. I do not know where. Good question. And I think it's probably kept a secret.
Great. Sam is also typing an answer to that, so we might get some more information there.
Okay.
Another question from Christina. Is the Small Current Railroad the original Marston Railroad?
I don't know.
Any chance, Sam, Justine, you might have heard anything about that?
I don't have the answer to that one.
But it's another thing to look up. Thank you.
All right. There is a question from Kim in the chat box. Is there any best place to share or send any 1915 photographs from family heirlooms? The San Diego Historical Museum or the San Diego Museum of History. So that's actually all of us. We are the San Diego History Center. We operate both the museum and a documents archive and a photo archive and a pretty cool object collection as well. If you are interested in donating some photographs, I will go ahead and drop a link in the chat box with our donate an artifact form, and you would basically get started there, and it kind of leads you through the process. So I will go ahead and do that. Justine, it looks like there's another question. Do you want to read that one out while I'm checking on that?
Sure. So can you speak on the proposed observation wheel to be constructed in the Plaza de Panama? Are there any additional projects that will accompany the wheel? And we actually just talked about this before we even started the presentation.
Yeah, I was told that the project has actually been put on hold, but the last piece of information I saw, which was right at the end of in December, was that approval had passed a couple of steps, and there was additional approval necessary for implementing that wheel. But that's all I really know at this point.
Yeah, as far the latest that we've heard is that it's been put on hold right now. So yeah, that's what we've heard. Not sure if that's going to change in the future, but definitely something to keep an eye on. Let's see. So we have a question about San Diego History Center exhibit and photos on the Zorro Gardens, the peephole, the adults only on display. More information about the Zorro Gardens as far as you know.
I don't have more information on the gardens, on the details of that. I don't know, maybe you, Justine or Katie, can answer whether we have photos in the archives on that exhibit.
We definitely have photos in the archives of the exhibit. And Katie, I don't know if there is a link to any of that.
Not necessarily of the exhibit, but if you go to the link that Sam just popped in the chat, which I will go ahead and put in the answer as well. And that will take you to our photo galleries. We don't necessarily have photos of the exhibit that I know of, but we definitely do have photos of the original Zorro Gardens from the 35 Expo, so you can definitely take a look at those. Some of them have been digitized. And then some have not been contact with us.
I know that there are some photos of Sally Rand, famous actress, if you will, who would give shows from time to time during that particular exhibit. I wanted to interject here before we go on. There was a reference I wanted to let people know about. I didn't spend much time talking about all these incursions and the potential incursions into park land that occurred between 1868 and the time that, well, maybe even the turn of the century, 1900. It's authored by a person named Montez, Montes. You can find it on our website. It's in our journal. It's from, I think it's from 1977, but if you really want to get a feel for how the city had to kind of thrust and parry with these various groups and people for land that they wanted. That's a really great article. It's good reading. It's not boring at all. It just gives you an idea of how difficult it must have been for the city government to fight off many of these groups.
And then just to add to that, Judy in the Q&A says the author's name is Gregory Montez, as Barry spelled it, Montes, and the journal has published several articles by him about Balboa Park.
Okay.
All right, and so our next question comes from Charles. Can you tell us something about the 1935 Gold Gulch area?
No, I have to apologize. I'm not surprised. I mean, there's so much information on the two expos. You can't tell the story of Balboa Park without the expos. The idea behind this presentation was to focus on the development of the park, of course, intimately involved with the expo. So I tried to just give you a smattering of what was going on at the expos themselves. The emphasis really on the buildings, and the legacy that these expos left. So that's my apology for not having an answer for your question.
And then I know we have a question about the lagoon. So there was a very, very small lagoon underneath the bridge. A lot of the postcards are very romanticized versions of what they were hoping to do with that lagoon. So there was a lagoon underneath the bridge. It was called the Laguna de Puente. And it didn't last very long. And it was just this tiny lagoon that had the lily pads on there, right? But what ended up happening was the city health inspector went down there and realized it was just grounds for mosquitoes, and it was just completely filled with larvae and things like that. Being in the middle of a canyon, obviously the mosquitoes were very much attracted to this body of water, so they had to drain it just because it was a complete public health hazard. So there was a very small lagoon at some point underneath the bridge, but it didn't last very long just because it was seen as pretty dangerous. So yes, there was a lagoon, not as romanticized and as big as the postcards want you to think, and didn't last very long because of the larvae and the mosquitoes that were infesting it.
And then Vicki did, just kind of touching back on the question about the rail line, the mini railroad and Marston's railroad. She says the mini railroad is not the same rail line as Marston's. So for the person that asked the question a little bit earlier. The next question comes from James. In 2015, I did an article noting summer 1915 speakers like Presidents Roosevelt and Taft and the evangelist Billy Sunday. Was this the first San Diego venue to draw such dignitaries?
No, I don't know. That's an area that I'll have to look up. I don't have an answer for that.
I know that there are some answers going on in the chat, so maybe Sam or Justine has heard something and they might be able to touch on this topic.
I know Sam is furiously typing away at these answers. Sam has been here for a long time in the park, so she definitely knows a lot.
And then just also some additional Gold Gulch info from Sam, 21 acres, largest fun zone attraction. It was designed by a Hollywood director. So Sam did say that she doesn't have a ton of information on speakers and venues and whether or not it was the first San Diego venue to draw, you know, the various dignitaries, presidents, and well-known names. But it was a big international audience, and so do a lot of big names. San Diego was quite small before, so, you know, only 40,000 people at the time of the 1915 Expo, so it's entirely possible it was one of the first times we were on the national and world stage. The next one is from Kiernan. Thank you for the great presentation. You mentioned the Committee of 100 and the movement to preserve some of the original buildings and architecture at Balboa Park. Who are the main figures, organizations pushing for the buildings to be removed or replaced?
Okay, I don't know, but I will probably, as soon as we close this session, take a look at that. I did not do any investigation along the lines. Good question, however. Thank you.
All right, so it looks like right now we have answered all of the questions that are in the Q&A and in the chat. I guess last call, did anyone want to ask one or two last minute questions? Sam does say in answer to the last question, that's a great question. I don't know the specifics because they didn't succeed, so.
I just want to mention the next presentation by Linda Canada. I will be taking a break. The series has been just wonderful for me. I'll be back with some additional topics in July. But Linda Canada, who's a great speaker, you'll enjoy her presentations over the next few months. And this is her next one, Women I Wish I'd Known, Tuesday, March 9th.
And then if you guys are interested in registering for that presentation, I have put the registration link for the next webinar in the chat box, so you can just access it there. And then there will of course be information on our social media, and then we'll be sending out e-blasts to people that are signed up for our newsletters. All right, so we hope to see you guys all next March. Looks like that's the end of the question. Thank you so much, Barry, for joining us today.
Thank you.
And thanks to everybody that came out. We hope to see you again next month.
Yep. Thank you all.